start this week's episode, let me introduce you to the Sunday spotlight of this week. His name is Shane Archer Reed, and he's a singer, actor, musician, and overall a really well-rounded artist from New York. He will be talking about his career and how it's been for him to start being a professional actor and how he manages to do all these different forms of art. And I think he has really interesting and great things to say. You will read his interview this Sunday, but if you want to find him before that, he has a website, www.shanearcherreed.com. That's ShaneArcherReed.com. Okay, guys, I have the most amazing episode for you this week. Not only is our 10th episode, but today I'm bringing the first guest to the Actors Bar. And it couldn't just be any person. It's one of my favorite people in the world, my favorite director I've ever worked with, and she also was a teacher for me during a certain period of time. Her name is Jamianne Devlin. And Jamianne has an MA in actor training and coaching from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. She was an actor for many years, and then after 7 years of being a professional actor and getting constant work, she decided to go to the UK and expand her training. I mean, most recently, she's been a visiting professor in Adelphi University and a director for the productions there. And that's how we actually met, because that's where I studied. And she was the first director in a big production that I had here in America. She is so inspiring. Like, when this woman talks, I just listen, and whatever she says is life-changing. That's how I'm gonna put it. Like, everything Jamianne taught me during the time she directed me, and that was only, a few months compared to my 4 years of professional training, was so much more useful than anything else I learned in acting school. Like, everything Jamianne taught me is what I'm actually using now for my auditions, for my jobs, and for my professional actor life. I encourage you to find out more about her and to work with her if you have to prepare monologues for an audition, or if you have any doubt about anything, if you need help with your headshots, resume, reach out to her. She's fixing her website right now and I guess rebranding everything and making it new, but you can still contact her on her email address, and that is devlin.jamianne@gmail.com. That is devlin.jamianne@gmail.com. And I wouldn't recommend someone different than her if you need coaching. So I don't think she needs more explanation. She's amazing. You're about to hear it right now. Let's welcome Jamianne Devlin to the Actors Bar. Hi, Jamianne. Welcome to the Actors Bar. I feel so honored to have you, and you're our first guest ever. So,
oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yes.
So I'm honored to be here.
Of course, we're so honored to have you. So the first question I wanted to ask you is the one that I ask everybody, and
okay.
What made you want to be an actor?
So what made me want to be an actor? When I was younger, I unfortunately was bullied in school. And I mean, and if you've ever experienced any sort of bullying, I hope you haven't, it can be a bit traumatizing.
Yeah.
And I really needed an outlet that allowed me to sort of figure out who I was, and an outlet that would encourage me to be comfortable with who I was. So when I was in middle school, I remember auditioning for my first play. It was called Monkey Magic, and it was Chinese folk tales. Okay. And I got cast, and honestly, it just opened me up, and I wasn't shy anymore, and I got to connect with people in a very different way than I ever had. And I found a comfortability in myself that I didn't have before. So that's sort of what brought me into theater.
Okay. Do you think that evolved over time, the reason why you stayed into theater?
I think so. I think it was just like I said, I really was able to figure out who I was, and I was with, a group of people who were more open I think that was what was important. It was walking into an environment where everyone had an open heart and an open spirit. And I think that, you know, just some of the children, unfortunately, that I was around at the time when I was younger, just were not very open, or, you know, maybe they also didn't really have an understanding of who they were as well. So I definitely think that over time, you know, it's just you know the feeling when you're in a group of people and in an ensemble and you just get each other. And that's what it always felt like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love it. I love this question because we all have different stories, but something in common.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so it's really cool to hear. Okay, so I wanted to ask you that after college, you also went to pursue your master's degree, and
Yes,
you
I
went
did.
to the UK. So I wanted to ask you why you made the decision to go into the master's, and if you believe that it's important for an actor to keep getting a training and education.
So when I graduated from college, and I think, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I you know, talked to other people that have also, you know, graduated. I think for a time you go through a bit of a lost period, you know, where you feel, and it's healthy. It's completely normal. I'm not saying that it's a negative thing. I think it's completely healthy to start to question your education. And I felt when I was in college, something didn't hit with me, or didn't land, or didn't resonate. And I felt very just confused and lost. And I felt like as a young actor, I think the problem is that sometimes we put on, or develop these neuroses. Like you think, okay, if to be a good actor, this is what I need to be. So I need to be a little crazy, or I need to go so far into the method acting technique and things like that to be a completely dedicated and whole actor. And I think that was happening for me. And I was taking the craft in a way too seriously. I wasn't enjoying it or having fun with it. So what made me go to London for grad school, I mean, number one, I always wanted to study in London. Some of the greatest actors of all time, obviously, came from the UK.
Yep.
And then just being there, I mean, it took me a little bit because to start, we did a lot of physical theater training, and I struggled with it at first. I didn't get it. I was mad at it. I was mad at myself. I was mad at my course leader. I just could not get it. And I was also the only American in my class. So my other cohorts had experience with this type of theater. I had never, you know, I came from more of I would say psychological actor training. And I struggled with with transferring over to this completely different art form. And then once I got it, it was just the most fulfilling and challenging and transformative experience I've ever had in theater. And I do think that every actor, you know, I mean, obviously depending on finances, should think about pursuing their master's degree. I think that you should take some time. I took 7 years between when I graduated from undergrad and then when I went to London. So I had a lot of time as a professional actress and as a director. And it also allowed me the time to determine my master's degrees in actor training and coaching. So I, you know, figured out halfway through my career, I don't know if I really want to be an actress, but I love working with actors and training actors and directing. So that's sort of, I had a bit of a switch. But I would highly recommend pursuing a master's degree. Very much so. I think you just find out more about yourself in a very valid and important way.
Do you think it needs to be a master's degree, or maybe you can get that sort of training in other ways?
I think you can get in other ways as well. I think that it's completely invaluable to, you know, here in New York City, they have the City Company, and they do classes, and the City Company teaches Anne Bogart's viewpoints method. So you can, you know, take master classes there. I mean, I've had friends who went to Paris to study with the school of Jacques Lecoq. People go to Poland, go to Grotowski's work center. Mm-hmm. I would say whatever works for you, whatever you want to explore more, do the research, and then just take the jump, because it could be so invaluable and to you as an artist, and also more importantly as a person. So I would highly recommend, figuring out what it is that you feel is lacking with possibly your education, or maybe what's happening in your career at the time, and then say, okay, I think it's this, and then just pursue it and see what happens.
Yeah, that is amazing advice. I think that even me being from Europe, I don't even consider that. Always my considerations are, okay, in the US, where are the best schools? And I think here we have like such a close-minded, kind of thinking as actors. We go to college.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. I've said it to students before. I think possibly you heard me say it. It's sort of like on a smaller scale when you think of where to do theater, and everyone is pointing you towards New York. And of course, if you want to do film, then you're going to LA. Yeah. And that's the push. But there's so many great theater cities in America that people don't, like Minneapolis is one, Boston is one. I don't think people tend to explore that. It's just been driven incessantly that it's New York. It doesn't have to be New York, and it's the same thing. It doesn't have to be America. And I'll be honest, I went to Ireland in 2010 to direct a show. And of course, I'm very Irish. It's my heritage. And so going there for the first time, it felt like being home. And so for me, I kind of always felt there was something amiss in my being with America. Not that I'm anti-American, but just I wanted to find a place that felt like home to me. That was Ireland. That was London. London felt very much like home. So I think it's also too, it's finding what makes you in this way sing, and what makes you a more complete and whole person. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And there's not only just one way to do it. Again, not just because you're not on Broadway, you're not successful. And that's so right. Good to hear. Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a detrimental thought in general. It's if I'm not on Broadway, if I'm not doing this, I will always say to students that the most important thing is that you are in theater. And I think that sometimes there tends to be this elitist idea of, if you're collecting tickets at a theater, or you're, doing backstage work, or you're doing, any other job within theater or film, just because you're not a lead in a show on Broadway, or even off Broadway, or even off Broadway, you're still in theater. You're still making money, because that's obviously important too. And you're still serving the world of the theater. So sometimes this whole idea that you have to be a Broadway actor, you have to be this like famous film actor, that's not going to fulfill you, right? Yeah. Sometimes independent projects are just as important as being in the bigger shows. Yeah. So again, I think it's also too, it's finding those little things, like whether it's a project you can do with some friends or some classmates, whether it's anything to keep you in the theater is completely invaluable.
Yeah. You're so right. Okay, I totally agree with you. I want to get more into the physical theater part, because you touched it a little bit. And I feel like there's a lot of people who might be listening and they don't know what it is at all. So what is physical theater, and why do you prefer it to a more psychological approach?
So physical theater is sort of, it's an umbrella term I use for practices that are a bit more somatic and more sort of outside in type of work. So for example, I mentioned it earlier, is viewpoints. So viewpoints is, it's basically this practice where you use different movement patterns to move around a space, and to just learn how to physically be within a space. You're not putting any emotion onto it. I mean, again, you may feel something may happen, and you may, have an emotional response, and that's completely fine. But it's not, it's not this pressure that, oh, I have to cry right now, or, oh, I have to be enraged at this moment. It's nothing like that. Then also I used Grotowski's method, which is deeply rooted in, he had this belief of what he called via negativa. So it is removing any physical blocks from an actor. And I think the problem is that through social conditioning or anything that can happen throughout our lives, you abuse your body more in an emotional way, and you develop this hatred of your own body. And I think what's really rewarding about Grotowski's work is, at first it may feel challenging, and you may be angry at the work, and you may be angry at yourself. But once you realize what blocks you're holding on to through movement, it can be really healing and very rewarding. And it begins a process where, and I had this, you begin to forgive your body for anything. It could be, I'll give you an example. I had fibromyalgia, and I felt physically tense all the time, and very tight and not very flexible. And then when I started doing Grotowski's work, it just opened me up. And there was an actor, and actually Marat, Sade, who had a physical break where he felt something just kind of like pop in his chest. Not in a bad way, but it was just this block opened up that he was holding on to for years, and he felt completely freed. And so it's more, again, it's less going into your personal psychology, and it's more of a physiological study of theater. So, for example, it's, instead of pushing for an emotional response by doing emotional recall or those types of exercises, this is through movement. You may just start crying, and you may not know why. And I think that that's also exciting too, is to try to, you go home, and I would always recommend having a journal, and you write about it, and you figure out, like, well, why did this feel so freeing? And why does this feel a little off? And when you start to, think about it, you unlock all of these doors that you may have physically had closed for a very long time.
Wow.
So that's why I use physical theater.
Yeah. Did you have a specific moment where it clicked? Because you said you struggled at the beginning. Was it something specific?
Gosh, it was awful. Like, in the beginning, I was so not open to it.
Okay.
And I remember I was doing an exercise. It was, so we had to create these repeated movement patterns. I believe I've made you do this before.
Okay.
And you had to repeat the same movement over and over and over again. And you could extend the move. You didn't have to stand locked in place. You could move in the room. But I did this repeatable movement pattern, and I'm looking around the classroom, and I'm seeing all of my classmates really free and really open and doing these kind of beautiful but simple movements, and they're just experiencing the movement. And some of them started to laugh, to cry, to have these responses. And the first thing I thought was, I'm going to reflect on the time that my boyfriend or my ex-boyfriend did something really terrible to me. And then I started crying, and it wasn't the same thing. I was putting more of a psychological spin on something that was supposed to be inherently very physical. Okay. So my course leader stopped me, and he asked me what was going on, and I explained to him what I was doing, and he said, that's not really it. Yeah. I get what you're trying to do. He said, we'll try this again tomorrow. And all I could think was like, no, I want to do this now. I want to get this. Yeah. And so we did it the next day, and I just gave over to it. And I mean, something felt like it popped in my abdomen. Okay. And I was laughing and crying, and there wasn't anything really put onto it. There wasn't a memory. Like, memory started coming out of the movement. If that makes sense. Yes, yes. And it was just so unbelievably freeing. And, again, I mean, it just felt like, bam, I got it. finally, you know?
Wow. Okay. That's so amazing. I mean, so you could say that this is a healthier way to approach acting.
Yes.
You think?
I am not a fan of the method training of actors. I don't think it's healthy. I think that the problem is that our bodies inherently protect us from trauma. Mm-hmm. So your brain naturally suppresses trauma to protect from going into a level of shock. So if you're trying to sit there and remember the worst thing that had ever happened to you, to get an emotional response during a very heightened love scene between two angry lovers, right? Yeah. And you're trying to remember the worst thing that's ever happened to you, your body could actually go into a state of shock. Wow. Because of the level of trauma that will be released from that initial traumatic event, maybe 10 times worse. And so I think a lot of times, maybe you've experienced it or other actors have, you see people going through like what I call an emotional hangover. Yes. After a rehearsal or after a scene, and you can't shake it off for hours. That's what I'm talking about. That's actually trauma being released instead of it safely being repressed. Yes. Sometimes it's not helpful to release that trauma. It just isn't. And especially, I would say, if you're in therapy, then yes, because you are in the safety of a medical professional who knows what they're doing. If you're in an acting class and that happens, you're with someone who doesn't know anything about neuroscience or psychology, and it could be dangerous. Yeah. And you can see, actors having breakdowns and actors, walking around with a massive wound, and that's not healthy. So that's why I will steer people more towards doing a somatic and physiological training than an overtly emotional one.
Right. I think the crazy part is that we consider acting that emotional response, that trauma that sometimes lasts not just days, but like months, is the normal thing. Like we hear stories all the time. I've actually seen it more in film and TV than in the theater world. Now that I'm here in LA, like they use method all the time, and you hear it in the news. So this actor did this film and now he's going to therapy because he's going through so much because of the acting. And it's like, well, that doesn't have to be like that.
No, and it shouldn't. And that's the thing too. It's, I think that I also try to stay away from using verbiage when I direct or when I teach about the body-mind divide. You're one organism. Yeah. It has to work together. And so I think that when we talk about like going into your mind, or, I think you have to just be so careful with actor training about not using certain verbiage, or sometimes encouraging, like, let's say you're in a classroom and you're watching a fellow classmate. I mean, give a decent performance, an emotional one, but the problem becomes it's, in a sense, quality versus quantity. So the quantity of tears and emotional, I don't want to say abuse, but emotional torture, that's a better word, that an actor is putting themselves through doesn't necessarily mean quality, because you also have to think of their quality of life as well. That's something that I think is really important with teaching young people theater, is you have to remember too, they're human beings and they come from, completely different backgrounds, and they have completely different experiences, and it can be really, really dangerous mixing in their personal psychology. And the other thing you have to remember too is the psychology of your character is completely different from your own. Once you start putting your own memories and your own experiences into that character, you're basically abandoning the words of the playwright. So there has to be a separation between the two, just to for there to be a healthy balance for the actor and also for the audience, because sometimes too, you want the audience to experience things, but if you've ever seen a performance that you're like, this has gone way too far, the audience feels that too.
Yeah.
They will. And it can be a little startling for them.
I love that. I mean, you don't hear too many people talking about this. So I think it's so important that you're saying that. So if an actor wanted to get into that, it's really hard here in the US. I think in many schools that we go, college, whatever it is, they don't teach that. So what is the best way that you'd recommend to start? Maybe some books or some classes in New York or?
Of course. I would say, number one, if you just research anything by Grotowski, Anne Bogart's Anne Bogart and Tina Landau's The Viewpoints book. If you look into that, anything by looking into Tadashi Suzuki, I would highly recommend. That's a really great grounding training. And I would honestly look at videos online, just Google Grotowski. You'll see the exercises from the 1960s where they're basically wearing underwear and doing these movements, and you're sort of like, well, what is this? But once you kind of explore and you get into it, it can be, again, like I said, it can just be very, very freeing. So I would say definitely looking for any resource you can grasp, and then looking at possibly the training, seeing where there may be classes or where there, you can go and study.
I love that. I remember the first time I saw the Grotowski videos and I watched them for hours. I was so fascinated. I'm like, what are they doing?
I mean, they're fascinating, and they can move.
Yeah, I was like, I could never do this. Like, what? It's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's actually really beautiful, and it's I was reading this book, Acting with Grotowski, and in the beginning, the author talks about the commitment to what the commitment to theater is, and it basically said it, and I think it's the same thing that you may experience if you're in love and you're with someone and you think, I want to be a better person for them, and I want to be around as long as I can for them. He talks about that you're there to serve the story, and you're there to be the best version of yourself. Both, again, I don't like using this term, body and mind.
Yeah.
But everything is, and I think he really, he talks about improving your intelligence and reading and doing research. It's not just about saying words on a page from a script, right? Yeah. And standing there opposite somebody. You need to become the ultimate performer in a way. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to be flexible. You have to be giving. You have to, be patient, understanding, but you also have to be healthy. Yeah. And you have to take care of yourself. Yeah. Because once anything goes, whether it's you lose your voice, you're feeling off because of something that happened in a rehearsal, you injure yourself, you're going to feel angry about, the performance you're going to give, because you feel like you're not fully committed.
Yeah. I love that. You're saying so many things that I think, but in the right words. I love that. So, okay, I need to bring this up because I remember when I worked with you, this was the most amazing thing. And this is the best thing I've ever been taught in any theater class or performance. Okay. That's ABBA emoting.
Yes.
I mean, that was life-changing for me. I mean, I was the kind of person who, there's a scene and you have to cry and you're there like, I have to cry, like thinking all the bad things. ABBA emoting just solved every problem I had. So,
good.
Can you explain that?
Of course. ABBA emoting was created by a psychologist. Her name's Susan Block. Mm-hmm. And she actually teaches this in Chile. Mm-hmm. You go down to Chile, they have these workshops and you're, studying on a beach and then you go surfing. So it's this, very, how do you say, it's this entire experience, right? Yeah. So I learned this in a workshop at Central. Okay. And the key I will say about Alba emoting, though, that I have to be very clear about is that I taught you obviously this, but it's important too to be certified. I'm not certified in Alba emoting, but I kind of showed you guys my interpretation of it. So I just wanted to be clear. Okay. So with Alba emoting, it is, you take many basic emotions. So it was rage or anger, fear. There's, I think I showed it to you, which is very embarrassing. The erotic one.
You did.
Sadness. And it's a combination of physical postures and changing of breathing patterns. And it will physiologically, you will have a response. Yeah. So, you know, I remember Harley, an actor that I worked with in the show, The Amish Project, he did the rage breathing pattern. And Harley is a very kind person. And he was very rarely, he said he never really experienced anger. And Harley said during that breathing pattern, he felt like blackout rage.
Wow.
There were people that, one was joy. Yes. People had a really difficult time. They said, I've always had a hard time laughing on stage. It doesn't feel real. And then you had moments where people were just like doubled over on the floor laughing. I think a lot of people responded positively to sadness.
Yes.
Because they said it was so difficult for them to not go to, I have to remember something traumatic that happened to me. Yeah. So that was that. And sometimes you just obviously don't want to do that. And they said that was very helpful. So again, I would say if that's something that interests people, definitely look up information on Alba emoting, see where they're offering classes. They do it within the United States, you know, work with a certified teacher. And if that's something that you're interested in, is get your certification and, you know, become an Alba emoting teacher. Because it's very, cool. It's one of my favorite exercises, to be honest.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah.
It was just watching people's responses. I mean, sometimes it's, you feel once they start to have the emotion, sometimes I would sit there and I would feel horrible because you don't want anyone, you don't want to see anyone go through anything in a way. And then the other amazing thing with Alba emoting too is there's a step out. Yeah. So after each emotion, you physically step out and you do like it's like a little step, and then you come back to a new spot in the room, and then you go to the next one. And it's just a healthy way of stepping away from the space, stepping away from the emotion, and separating yourself, saying, okay, I'm actually fine now. And once you go back to normal breathing, it sort of is like if you have sorbet after a meal to cleanse your palate, that's just what it is. The step out is the sorbet. So it's just a healthy way of just removing yourself from it and saying, okay, I'm fine. This happened. Great. Okay. On to the next thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I wish more people talked about it and taught it in schools.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if there is just, sometimes I feel that there's this weird fear about teaching physical theater training.
Why do you think that is?
I think, so number one, I mean, I'm going to go into, I hate going into this type of a rant, but, you know, I think looking back on the history of American theater training, ultimately the method that we talk about is based on Stanislavski's work.
Yeah.
A lot of the books about Stanislavski, in particular, I believe it's Elizabeth Hapgood's books about him, are wildly incorrect because the translations are off. You know, I think towards the time that she was working on this book, he was ill, and it was just trying to get all of his, I mean, it's a big volume of work.
Yeah.
So when the Moscow Theater came to America in the 30s, that's where Lee Strasberg and Uta Hagen and I think Meisner and some of those acting trainers were exposed to Stanislavski for the first time.
Yeah.
The exercises weren't taught by Stanislavski himself. They were taught by two of his teachers.
Okay.
So here you have it. Like, even when I say I teach Grotowski, I'm teaching my experience of Grotowski. I'm obviously not teaching, because I'm not Grotowski, right?
Yeah.
So you have there a diluted version of Stanislavski going down to Lee Strasberg. And when Lee Strasberg started opening his schools, we were in the middle of the Cold War. So you had an American acting trainer take a Russian acting methodology and transform and warp it into an American one. So I hate to bring like politics into it that way as well, but looking at what was happening in the world, it's something that,
it makes sense. Yeah.
We took ownership of something that really, in a sense, wasn't ours. And I think that, I don't know if it's just, this is the way it's been done for so long. I mean, I've said this to my fiance, that I feel very strongly about this, that actor training needs to be almost, what doctors do. They do research, they find new treatments, they go to conferences, they learn about, every single, nook and cranny of the medical world, which is important. And I think it's the same thing with acting teachers. I think you have to be aware of everything that's out there, because you may have a student who does not respond to, let's say, the method, whatever that means, right? They may not respond to psychological actor training. I mean, I've had actors that don't respond to physical theater training, which is completely fine. Every actor is an individual, and you need to find, okay, if this isn't working, then I need to go to something else. Because the problem is, when you have an actor and you're teaching them and they're not responding, you don't want them to feel forgotten about. You don't want them to feel like they're wrong or they're not normal. And I think that that's also too, you just have to find like every possible option out there just to be the most well-rounded teacher that you can be, and to serve your students in the best possible way. So I think that there may be a fear of, not doing it correctly, or people sometimes make fun of physical theater training. Like, I remember someone making a joke about Grotowski one time and saying, this just seems like they're part of a hippy dippy actor commune, or something like that.
Wow.
And, of course I was just, okay, that's fine.
Really offended.
Some people have said they felt Viewpoints was a waste of time.
Wow. Okay.
And again, totally fine. Whatever works for you. Me personally, I don't like psychological actor training. I just don't. I just think it messes with too much. It's too, it's too raw, and you're not really taking care of your students. For me, physical theater training, I think, is more of the way to go. And I think it's just, if people gave over to it or exposed themselves to it more, then they would, I think they would give over to it.
Maybe a lot of people who criticize it, they haven't even like tried it fully. It's just that fear of different,
right. It's also like, it'll happen. Like if you read a book and you think it's like completely exceptional, and someone starts to read it and they don't understand it, and they're like, well, I thought that was the most just ridiculous, it's like that. It's something, we fear what we don't understand. And so we're going to retreat from it. So I think that was, I think that's possibly why. And I think a lot of theater departments just get stuck in the same old, old patterns over and over and over again. And it's hard to get out of it.
Well, theater, I think in general, is very stuck in something that's just been repeated for years, right?
Yes, I agree. And I think that, again, it's hard to say, but sometimes when you look at something, like I said, if a department is sort of stuck in their ways and not willing to move forward or move towards what might be healthier or what might just make more well-rounded actors, it's not necessarily saying there's something wrong with us or we're doing the wrong things. It's just saying, okay, you know what, that worked in the past. Let's combine two things. Let's try this. Let's try this. I think you can't take it as an attack on yourself as a theater department. You just have to, move forward and try new things.
That's hard with artists though. Like most of us are very, egocentrical, right? We take everything very personally, so it's a hard one.
It is very hard.
So my next question is more geared towards what is happening right now. And I mean, I think we as actors, we're very used to, you know, those periods where we don't have anything and we don't have work, and, you know, how do we deal with that? But right now it's even crazier. It's like an extreme level. So how do you deal with it generally, not just right now? And how do you advise? What are your tips for actors to keep going?
Sure. So I think, you know, unfortunately, I live in New York, and I was employed by Carnegie Hall and by an off-Broadway theater company. And I lost both of my jobs in the course of 1 week.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm sure anyone that has felt the sting, it's horrible. You feel awful. But I think the important thing is to take it as an opportunity and to say, okay, this has happened. I feel awful. You know, I don't have a regular paycheck coming in anymore, or whatever the situation is for each individual person. I would say focus on reading as much as you can, reading, you know, maybe some books about theater that you never thought you would.
Yeah.
I would say look at different plays and film and television, you know, and just see, you know, kind of get your own viewing history or reading history, and just have that at the ready for anyone that's, you know, that's an actor. I would say get your auditioning material ready, because at some point you will be back at it. See, you know, if you know anyone who is, let's say, I don't know, an acting coach like myself, you know, ask about coaching and seeing, you know, it's just keeping yourself as sharp as possible.
Yeah.
And I think looking into things like I bought an anxiety book that I'm reading right now just to work through, because it is a very tense time right now.
Yeah.
This is obviously, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. I doubt you have. It's very hard. It's very stressful, but I think it's about keeping a level head and saying, okay, you know, this is the situation right now. It's not always going to be this way. How can I prepare for when theater is back, or when film and television are back? What can I do to, you know, be a better actor? What can I do to be a more well-rounded human being? You know, what can I do to, you know, just improve myself in various ways? And I think also too, just practicing self-care, whatever that means, whether it's meditation or, you know, doing a self-care challenge for 30 days, and, you know, just kind of learning about yourself in that way, and not putting too much anger or pressure on yourself, because obviously none of this is anyone's fault. Right. You know, you can't, no one could have predicted that this was going to happen.
And no one can control it. So,
and no one can, I mean, wish I could. If I could snap my fingers and the coronavirus could go away tomorrow, I would be thrilled. And it's just, it's not, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So I would say it's just keeping yourself sharp, as, you know, whatever you are in theater. If you're a designer, you know, maybe it's taking up photography. It's looking into text analysis. It's just doing those things that are going to make you, you know, just ahead of the game when all of this comes back. Just don't become complacent in, you know, in what this is, because it's not going to last. It won't last forever.
Yeah.
Things will be different, right? We anticipate that.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I'm so tired of hearing the term the new normal.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is what it is. And so I'd say it's really important to do those things.
Okay.
And to, you know, find little things that bring you joy every day, whatever that is.
Absolutely, I agree. So, okay, so we're getting to the end, but now I want to hear more your advice as an experienced actor and coach.
Okay.
Because, I mean, like me, I graduated 2 years ago, right? And so many people, there are so many young actors out there, and
yeah,
experience, and I bet they have, like you did, this time where you're lost. It's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
They go to auditions, not just lost, sometimes rejection, right? Like maybe everything in college was great and you get out and nothing. Like,
yeah.
What do you do?
Again, I mean, I think it's, I think number one, it's, you keep trying.
Okay.
It's really important to not give up. And I mean, and also to not give up on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to say this, and you can't, I think to a degree, it's difficult to say it to people in college, because you ultimately, students are paying for a service from you, right?
Yep.
I don't mean to bring it to that level, but it's true. And to sit there and say to people, well, some of you aren't going to make it. That's a really hard thing to say. And I think that it's just keeping a level head of, like you said, you may have gotten cast in almost every show in college and it was great and you had a sense of security and you may have defined yourself by what you were cast in or, you know, things like that. And then when you get out, it may be completely different.
Yeah.
That's not your fault. It's nothing that, you know, maybe technically you're doing. And I think the strange thing is just this idea of, because coming also from a directing background,
yeah.
I think that you tend to, actors tend to mind read directors. Like, well, why didn't I get cast? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? And it could be something completely, it could be small. It could be, they're casting a family of 4 and you just don't look like the father, you don't look like this. I mean, you've worked with me several times. I'm not like that really. Yeah. But you may have that situation. It could be, a devil, you know, situation where the director's worked with someone a number of times and they can't not cast them. You may be amazing.
Right. And
I think it's just reminding yourself that, I hate saying it, it is part of the life of theater. I think, again, it's finding ways to keep yourself emotionally healthy. You know, I would say probably doing a journal, maybe write about the audition experience after and see, you know, what maybe could have been different. I think it's also, I will say this to every actor, this is really important.
Okay.
I think the level of respect that you give to everybody is massively important. So when you walk into any audition and you see the monitor in the hallway or the casting panel or anything, you treat the monitor the same way that you treat the entire casting panel. Because I will tell you, I'm not going to say names or anything, obviously, but I had auditions for a show.
Okay.
And I was in the theater, obviously waiting for people to come in.
Yeah.
And we were on a break. And one of my stage managers told me that this actor acted completely horrifically, was swearing, was like just a nightmare. And unfortunately for that person, they actually gave a very good performance.
Right.
But I am not going to put a group of actors or my stage management team or anybody in an uncomfortable position where they don't feel like they can trust someone in the room.
Yeah.
So I think it's just keeping in mind, you know, not just like create like a big brother paranoia, but you are being watched and people will discuss things. So I think it's always being polite, always being prepared. Don't beat yourself up. It's hard. It is really hard. I experienced rejection a lot worse in college than I did when I got out.
Okay.
In college, I would call my mom and I would cry and she would listen and, you know, she would joke around and say bad things about the other actors that I was auditioning against, like things like that, like mom stuff. I would rant to my roommate. And then I think when I got out of college, I had just outgrown some of that and I was able to shake it off. But it has to be, you know, you have to come to a point where you have to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is do everything that you possibly can to keep yourself maybe a step ahead. So it's maybe if you feel like your vocal training wasn't enough, go get a vocal coach. If you feel like physically stiff, maybe go look for a class in the Alexander technique or Grotowski or any of the other practitioners that I mentioned to you before.
Yeah.
I think it's just always keeping yourself, you know, improved and not losing hope, because something will come.
Yeah.
Again, as I said to you earlier, it's removing this elitist idea of what theater is.
Yeah.
And it's more of involving yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's not saying I'm terrible because I didn't get this big, massive thing. It's saying, okay, that happened for someone else. It didn't happen for me right now, but it might.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just, it's being kind to yourself and not, because the worst thing you can do is become an angry actor.
Yes, I agree.
And sit in a little world of self-hatred. It is not going to do you any good. And it's only really going to make you hate theater or hate acting.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, you know, practicing kindness to yourself and to other people.
That's amazing advice. Thank you, Jamianne.
You're so welcome.
So
I hope it helps.
It helps me for sure. I bet it will help everybody. So you are also an acting coach.
Yes, I am.
So if you want to tell us a little bit about that, and also tell everybody who's listening where they can find you.
So I am an acting coach and trainer. That's what my master's degree is in, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And so I would say if anyone is remotely interested in, I mean, obviously it's going to be Zoom coachings.
Yeah.
From now on for a little while. I would say to contact me. I'll provide you with my contact information. Perfect. So you can share that. I'm currently updating my website. And I'd be more than happy to do online coaching, to do resume review. And if you also want me to take a look at your headshots and give you some honest feedback, you know, I'd be more than happy to do anything that may improve, you know, your chances of being cast at some point.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. We'll put it on the show notes so everybody can see.
Great.
So yeah,
great.
I think that's all for today. This was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Jamianne, for being the best.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love this. This was so fun.
You were the best first guest ever. So
thank you so much. I'm so glad.
I hope we'll have you over another time. Oh, yes. We'll send you a diploma.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Jamianne. My heart feels full. That's how I feel every time I talk to Jamianne. But no, really, how amazing was this conversation? Like, she has so many amazing points. Like, this made me think. I was like, what am I even doing? You know, like, I got out of college 2 years ago and I still haven't taken any class. I mean, I feel like, yes, you have to take time, and I do plan on getting my master's, and right now it's not the best moment. It's not like I can travel to Europe and go do a Grotowski workshop. But as soon as this pandemic is over, like, this has made me like reevaluate everything that was my plan, you know, like there are so many options out there, and you can't just like stay stuck in what you already know and just keep growing, keep doing your thing. So yes, super grateful that Jamianne came to the podcast. And stay tuned for next week. I think we're going to have another guest. And before we end the episode this week, I wanted to bring the play of the week. This week, the play I wanted to bring is The Persecution and Assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, as performed by the inmates of the asylum of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade, usually called Marat Sade. And I just had to. This is the play I performed, and I was directed by Jamianne. And this is such an amazing masterpiece. If you haven't read this, which you probably haven't, it's very strange. If you're into like experimental, philosophical, existential, weird theater, this is your thing. There's a movie version of it, and you'd like it. I don't think this is the kind of play you'd read to find monologues for an audition or scenes for an audition. It's, again, very different, but it's definitely something that if you're into that kind of thing, you should watch or read. I mean, I would say read, and then if you want, watch the movie. So really recommend this. One of my favorite plays ever, and an amazing experience, and so honored that I got to be part of this. So again, the play is Marat, Sade by Peter Weiss. So this will be all for this week. Thank you so much for another episode. We're already at number 10, double digits. And if you enjoyed the episode, there's so much more coming, so many more amazing guests, and so many more fun things. So if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes and rate it 5 stars, because that really helps the podcast so it can be heard by other people and we can help each other and create a community. So if you already don't follow the Actors Vow on social media, follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and I will see you next Wednesday.